Hello viewers, welcome. You're watching SlyMedia TV. My name is Doc Vikela and you're watching Legal Matters. Today on the show, I'm with Attorney Marara. Attorney, how are you doing?
Corona greetings, my
Corona
brother.
greetings.
I'm phenomenal.
Yes. I think before we even get into the show, we just want to, solidarity-wise to the rest of the world.
Definitely.
Yeah, that, in this, we are standing with them.
100%.
Yes, our prayers are with them, and also,
100%.
hoping that they find the vaccine in as soon as possible, so that we avert, more and more loss of life.
You're right, and also I think for people to exercise caution and general hygiene, and also all those basic guidelines, I think it's quite critical. And I believe together we can actually contain this pandemic.
Yeah, sure. So viewers, today on the show, we are going to be talking about divorce. Specifically, what happens after a divorce? You are in a marriage that you feel like you are not comfortable with. What do you do? How do people get to divorce? I think it's the hardest thing right now. People don't have no idea. So maybe if you can unpack for us the issue of divorce.
So right now, Doc, I think Zimbabwe is one of the countries that has got the highest number of divorce cases. What you find is more and more people are going through divorce. One of course, going to focus on the reasons why people divorce, because that's in the realm of sociology, anthropology. But you find that we have got two processes if you're going through a divorce. A divorce basically is simply saying, I'm tired, it's over. I don't want to continue with the marriage. I know people make vows that till death do us part, but eventually it's a divorce that does them apart. But the process is usually what we call the opposed divorce. That's where you file your papers in court, then the other party is contesting. You have what is called the unopposed. I'm going to touch later on the procedural aspects of how you go through a divorce. But what you notice with the unopposed is every Thursday, the High Court in Marara is presiding over unopposed matters. And these are several cases of divorce. But right now you'll be shocked that many people are actually in marriages which are essentially lifeless. Of course, not saying people should divorce, but this is a reality. People still go through divorce. So if your marriage is not working, I think you've tried everything for you to try to bring it back to life. What do you do? And which is what I think is the focus of our program today. So we've given a basic definition of a divorce where parties are basically going through a termination of the marriage or the marital union. So one of the things that you find, people say, I'm going through a divorce. Why do they say I'm going through a divorce? Because it's not an event, it's a process. Then at the end of it, you're going to be given an order, which is going to grant you a decree of divorce. But for an ordinary person, the question is, in what circumstances can you seek a divorce? What are the grounds for divorce? I think that's the question which many people would really want to understand and to think whether or not you've got a ground for divorce. But right now, in terms of our law in Zimbabwe, there is actually one or two grounds for divorce. I hear people saying, no, they committed adultery. So adultery is not a ground for divorce. Yeah, okay. It's not. So even if you find your wife red-handed or green-handed, that's not a ground.
I actually tell them now, everything's fine, let's continue. No.
The ground, the first ground that's recognized is irretrievable breakdown of a marriage. In other words, we're simply saying this is no longer just a breakdown, because marriages do actually break. But this type of breakdown is irretrievable, meaning it's not one that we can redeem. So the irretrievable breakdown of marriage, that becomes the general ground of divorce. However, there are several considerations that a court has to take into account in order to determine whether or not the marriage has irretrievably broken down. That's when you can say, my wife, my husband is involved in an adulterous relationship, which I don't find compatible with the continuation of a normal marriage relationship. So it's not just adultery.
Wow.
So the adultery has to be incompatible. In other words, you find it impossible for you to continue with the marriage in the face of that adultery. So it makes it impossible for you to continue with a marriage union. And under the irretrievable breakdown leg, one of the considerations is the issue of whether or not you have been together for a period of a year. So if you have not spent time or you are not with your wife or husband for a year, someone is staying somewhere, that's a ground which can now be considered as part of the irretrievable breakdown.
So attorney, you're saying if someone says anchada,
Yep.
like you mnanongomukashita aina mukadzi anchada, kautwa mwaona sisi ani munoziya
Better someone.
ona better someone, is that grounds nguta
With all my
changoda
heart.
apasina love apasina anchada munhu, is that grounds to say we are terminating?
All right, remember the test that I give you, it's irretrievable breakdown of marriage. And there's no prospect of a restoration of a normal marriage relationship. So the question that you need to look at is, do we have sufficient facts to show that the marriage is irretrievably broken down such that there's no prospect of continuation of a normal relationship? But what you find now is the grounds that are provided for as considerations for irretrievable broken down of a marriage in terms of the Matrimonial Causes Act, they're not exclusive. Meaning can also have some grounds which are not necessarily in the act. For example, parties have lost love and affection for each other. That's also a ground. So because we've lost love and affection for each other, that has made the marriage irretrievably broken down. Such an extent that you can't actually continue with a normal marriage relationship. So those are some of the considerations that the court looks at. Remember, marriage, it's a form of a contract where you need to be a person of the requisite capacity, then you must be in a position to actually say, I do. Then you have to sign that certificate. So the moment you sign that certificate, essentially that certificate is proof of that agreement. So divorce now effectively, even if you are physically not together, but that paper still ties you together. So not contemplated formalizing the separation, it becomes very critical for one simple reason. If you don't deal with the certificate, effectively, even if you've got another person, what it means, you're committing adultery. That's what it means. So until you terminate this relationship, you're committing adultery if you're a man or even a woman. Secondly, there's a crime called bigamy. So if you don't terminate this one, and you proceed to marry someone, that's bigamy. Thirdly, there are also implications when it comes to inheritance. So if you're a spouse and you proceed to marry, then there is a live marriage. Remember the concept of a surviving spouse. So by virtue of that marriage, the other party is the surviving spouse. Okay. Meaning they can lay a claim to your estate by virtue of a marriage certificate. And once the marriage certificate is intact, in other words, before it has been dissolved, what it simply means is any person who comes after the marriage certificate is not recognized. So your wife does not exist. Your new husband doesn't exist as long as the marriage certificate is intact. That's why I think it's critical for people to seriously focus on ensuring that they bring closure, especially if they were married in terms of the Marriage Act, Chapter 5.11. So what we generally need to encourage people, number one, for those who are no longer staying with their spouses, I think we need to move away from the reluctance that, no, I'll do it sometime, because you don't necessarily have what time. So that's why it's very critical now to ensure that the process is done. Then, I need to clear a bit of confusion, which is something that you find in town. So we've got what we call an unregistered customary law marriage, which is what many people are in now. An unregistered customary law union is where you go to Mattesr and you pay the bride price. Then you're given the wife. That's what many people have now. But the moment you say, I no longer want, you're not going through a divorce. Because an unregistered customary law union is not recognized.
So, I think our dear viewers, Murungo Zinzwira, you're hearing that for yourselves. So please join our comment section, write your questions there. Let's engage each other in this issue. This is a very, I think, serious matter. Like you said in the beginning, that there are so many other issues that stem out from a divorce. The issues to do with property itself, right? So say people have come to a divorce. What is the position of the law in terms of property?
All right. Let me touch on that, but allow me to conclude the issue of the people who are unregistered customary law unions. So the term divorce is one of the most abused terms. So if you're in an unregistered customary law union, you can't divorce because you're not married. So what you'll be doing in essence is simply a termination of a union. Okay. So the court becomes interested the moment you guys acquired property. That's when the court comes. So you acquired property together. Now you want the property to be shared. So you have tried to talk, no, I want to take this, I want to take that, and you can't agree. So now the remedy is you approach the courts seeking that order for property sharing. So that's when you find people who are not necessarily married in terms of the Chapter 5.11 marriage coming to court and now asking for the court to preside over the sharing of the assets. And like what you're saying, when we're looking at divorce, one of the things that the court is so much concerned about, the court is not just going to grant you divorce, even if the matter is not opposed. The court wants to deal with ancillary issues. So, let's say you're married and you acquired property. So the property issue becomes an ancillary issue, meaning we can't ignore it. So the approach is, if the court is going to issue with an order, it has to be a conclusive order insofar as your marriage and the marital affairs are issued. In other words, the court wants to know if we have got property, how are we going to distribute that property? Secondly, if there are children in the marriage, how are they going to be maintained? Thirdly, if there are children as well, how is the issue of custody going to be addressed? Then, is it going to be joint custody? Is it going to be sole custody? Alternatively, is it going to be a scenario whereby you've got absolute custody and the other party does not have visiting rights? So there's something we call visiting rights or access rights. So you may not necessarily have the custody, but you're allowed to visit your child.
Okay. I think viewers would want you to unpack a certain area where you talked about the issue of property, right? Is it a foregone conclusion, per law, that if you divorce today, you have it's a marriage, you divorce, that you share things equally, or the other circumstances? Because you have heard this on the streets. And I think viewers who are people be like, I can run by 50-50.
You see, that's one of the misnomers that circulate in the street. So there's some cunning people who just marry people who are rich, thinking that when they divorce, they will get everything. Yeah, and for some people, yeah, indeed, they actually made money from divorce. There's this lady, I think you know her, I won't mention the name, but I went to Forbes and they said so forth and they said divorce. So she's a billionaire right now. But what happens when it comes to property? So the formulation is very simple. Property is categorized into 3 categories on divorce. Number 1 is what is called his. His is the property that you acquired before marriage. So we're supposed to say, okay, you acquired a chair, let's put it aside, that's yours. You acquired a bed, let's put it aside. Then there's hers, meaning the lady also acquired a property prior to divorce, meaning that property is also put aside. So what you brought into the marriage stands aside. What she brought into the marriage stands aside. Then there's the third bracket, which is called their property. So their property, this is the property that you acquired during the tenure of your marriage. Now, that's where the issues come. How is the property going to be shared? You're now looking at things like the issues of contribution. What was the level of contribution? Because now, you find there's a tendency whereby men will say, no, I put everything during this marriage. So now the court has also recognized that even though a woman might not have contributed financially, but she might also have contributed indirectly by doing the work, creating an atmosphere where you are able to actually work. And though that contribution might not necessarily be able to be fiscally computed, but somehow it's actually a contribution which enabled you. So the theirs category, that's where you find most of the fights they're going through. And essentially the issues getting divorced.
Is it?
Now, quickly, what happens is the law of ownership kicks in.
Okay.
So now, once you buy it for me, you give it, you've completed the process of transfer of ownership. It becomes my vehicle. So even if we divorce, come on, you can now claim it and say it's mine. It's just like you buy a gift for your girlfriend before you get married. Then somehow you discover there was a bigger blesser. Then you want the vehicle. Again, the laws of ownership kick in because now it's deemed to be her property.
It's her property.
Yeah.
Irregardless that it was acquired during the course of that union.
You're right.
Ah, precise. So I think, and also you talked about how does this law apply both ways, where if a woman was helping the husband emotional support, psychological support for him to acquire this empire, and they are supposed to share. Does this apply also if the woman was acquiring a vast empire and the man was not doing so well, but he was there? I think viewers would want to know.
Yeah,
Yes.
you see, in a marriage setup, you can't put a price. I'm cooking salsa for you. You can't put a price to that. I'm ensuring that you come to a beautiful home, clean home, the gardens are well done. You can't put a pecuniary value to that, but that value is also considered in the process of divorce. That's why you see many men would want to actually literally strip you of everything. But it doesn't work that way because that contribution is very critical. But there's one thing that I need to quickly and it can be proven that it was acquired during the tenure of the marriage, it can still be divided. And it even extends to companies. So if you've got a company right now, and your wife has got an interest and can prove that that company came into existence or even acquired shares from any of these companies during the tenure of the relationship, she can lay claim to those assets.
Wow.
She can. But what I need to encourage many women, especially, is when you're buying properties, if you want to go the route of registering the properties in your name, try to ensure that your name also appears on the title deeds. Why? Because the moment you're jointly registered, the principle is simple. It's 50-50. So once we appear on the title deed, you can't say 40, 30, 70, no. The principle is it's 50-50 because the presumption is that you hold the property in equal shares. So it also has to protect women because many times you find that women are so much in love and they're just saying, Baba, it's okay. But you see, if anything happens, that property can actually be attached. If the husband borrows money, they can go and lodge the title deed. And that's when you find a house being sold, the wife knows nothing. But of course, trying to encourage fellow men like you and me that we also need to be responsible and to ensure that our families are covered. So what I really encourage people is to realize that there's no divorce that's the same. It's always different. The considerations are different. But if you're going through a divorce, one of the main advice that I give to clients that I handle is to try to ensure that the divorce is handled in an unopposed way, where parties have to sit down with their respective lawyers. If you don't have a lawyer, I encourage you to get a lawyer. So sit down with your lawyers, ensure that you identify the real issues. What is the real issue? But the main sticking issue in a divorce is usually property. So if a person says, I no longer want, the position of the law is you can't force them to say, I still love you. You're not going anywhere. So, Dr. T, I was missing you, I miss you, I still love you. It's not a very important consideration because constitutionally, you've got a right to freedom of association. So a court cannot force you to continue staying with the person you no longer want. So as long as you no longer want, the ground is you have lost affection, love and affection.
So I think the viewers they want to inquire, they want to find out that is it, does the application of the law also apply to unions that say people have been together for 25 years? Yep. There's no marriage, there's no white wedding to eat, there's no, they've been, and then now